Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. This is the inaugural MIT Enterprise Forum of the 2018-2019 calendar year. We're very proud of all of our success. We're very proud of everything that we've done. We're very proud that we've brought technology to the masses, and we're continuing that trend this year. We're also taking a little bit of a pivot this year. So in years past, the MIT Enterprise Forum has tackled some of technology's biggest topics like space and blockchain, and then blockchain again, and blockchain, you know. We are the masters of technology buzzword bingo. And it's at the end of each year that we basically say to ourselves, we're a little bit ADHD with our kind of blockchain, buzzword bingo. And this year, we're trying to do buzzword bingo because it works. And we're also going to try to start a little bit to carry a conversation forward. And our season theme this year is persistence. And what we're trying to do tonight when we talk about Connected Cities Northwest is that we are going to tee up a conversation that we're going to continue throughout this season when we start understanding how can we improve quality of life using technology for people everywhere. And we're using this discussion tonight to start that conversation. And we'll continue to have different events throughout this year to take that topic and pursue it even further. We're very fortunate to have our friends from Town Hall supporting us once again. Thank you very much, Amanda, to you and your team. This has been a very strong partnership. We look forward to continuing it in the future. We're also very happy to align ourselves with the MIT Club of Puget Sound, as well as the Harvard Club. We're very grateful to our speakers and to the companies that they represent, Urban Systems, Verizon, Digital Town, and Artifact Group, which we're going to learn a lot more about tonight. I'm going to step off the stage because I am not why you guys came to this event, but I want to thank you all very much for coming. We're really looking forward to a strong season this year. We're really looking to understand better how to use technology to improve quality of life and welfare. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up our moderator, John Rousseau, who is the VP of Design at Artifact Group. John?
Thanks, Ben. Well, it's really my pleasure to be here tonight and to host and moderate this panel, talking about smart cities and all of the issues associated with them, and hopefully getting to some of these ideas about persistence and what we mean by quality of life. So the format for tonight, we have 3 excellent panelists. They're each going to give a short talk. I'll come up kind of one at a time, introduce them. They'll come up, give their talk, and when we're done with that, we'll all assemble up here and get into a discussion about some of the ideas that they bring up. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Stan Curtis. Stan is the VP at Urban Systems. Urban Systems and its partners provide a range of civic engagement, financial, design, and software services that reduce costs, simplify design and financing, and build scalable operational management for cities who are looking to explore new transit systems, roads and utilities, or modernize aging infrastructure. Stan has an amazing academic and business background. He's an expert in process modeling, performance assessment, and change management. He's worked for companies like IBM and Accenture, where he's led practices in tech strategy, open innovation, and platform-based development. He continues to be an advisor for IBM for their Smarter Cities research and continues his work with Accenture and White House Fellows on sustainability models and wellness management. So please help me welcome Stan to the podium. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Stan. I didn't make it into MIT. I went to Berkeley. But I did do a spin out from MIT on artificial intelligence, and my wife did go to Harvard, so I guess we like both of those clubs. It's really an honor to be here. And I love the topic. So I'm sort of known for a couple of things. I did help IBM start their smart cities research. And the topic tonight, sort of around smart cities, what is it? We viewed the smart cities starting from Smarter Planet And we were at the time looking at Smarter Planet for Internet of Things and thinking about Wi-Fi bandwidth, fiber optic bandwidth, and the number of sensors per person. But to really do anything with it, we really realized more and more it was about the last mile and what the people were actually doing with it. And then the science started kicking in over time that more and more of the things are actually about humans. In fact, we've left so many rings around the bathtub that is called a new geologic era. So smart cities is about people and how to organize the Anthropocene behavior problems, actually, from the dominant species. So we're leaving quite a footprint. This is the Painted Hills, where they figured out about tectonic plates. And each of those color changes is about 10 million years. So it's a big thing, and we're leaving signs like that with carbon and plastic and lots of other kinds of symptoms. There's several. We are a very strong species. If we can't domesticate it, we are the dominant predator, and there's not much left if we're not domesticating it. So it's a big thing for how we live. But the good thing is people's behavior is exponential. It feeds back on itself. And so it's very important to spin positive instead of negative. And so the power laws work. Most people live in cities. Most of the carbon ring is caused by either coal or gas. And most of that kind of stuff happens in cities. And we've been doing cities for thousands of years. So we know patterns that kind of work. And you can see here a couple of different kinds of cities, but it's very similar patterns of how we mix buildings and get access to the different markets in the cities. So the smart city idea, I just wanted to give a couple of examples. Maybe we can go through the ones that are really interesting here. But in China, for example, they're thinking about Bay Area 2.0 and scaling up the San Francisco economic development model. But they're looking at it as, 10 million, 20 million, 40 million, 80 million megacities. So the Asian model for scaling up is to build, China's got 1 billion people, 50 million per city, 20 cities. You got China. And that's actually what they're doing. They have city clusters, mega city clusters. They have 20 of them. So that's one model of how to use smart cities to think about better economic development. And here, you can see that around the world that the GDP per capita gap is closing in terms of the opportunity for quality of life. The other thing that's happening is in the mature economies like Europe and Japan, some of the cities are shrinking. So city by city, there's a couple of patterns. One pattern is growth, the mega city in China. One pattern is stable, maybe even shrinking, like Detroit and like Europe. So the tale of two cities, I think urban planning and smart cities has some behavior spins to it that are really significant. And one of the things that really matters is how accessible the activities are that you want. So here are two cities the same size, Atlanta and Barcelona. One city was designed for horses, one city was designed for cars. They both put in light rail because it's a very cool thing to do. Barcelona covered 80% of their population. Atlanta covered like 10% of their population. So you can see that behavior matters, and the willingness to be close together and live in a dense pattern than more traditional patterns might be better balanced than some of the more later ones. So this is the inconvenient truth about science, and about especially the science of smart cities, that there are a lot of paradoxes, that the science feed back differently. And it's dominated by the behavior. You can spin positive or you can spin negative, but just building more freeways doesn't improve traffic. This is 23 lanes in Houston. Guess what happens when it rains? This is also one of our national research labs doing a net zero building to really save the carbon footprint of the building. The bad news is they funded a parking lot, encouraging lots of people to drive and leave the parking lot empty, so the building itself is underutilized. So this is really not, the best behavior-inducing pattern. And you see this over and over again. This is in Japan. This is the largest city in the world, Tokyo, and they're getting ready to do a showcase for the 2020 Olympics. And so they're very good at transit-oriented development. You've been on their subway system. And so they built a smart city They even earthquake-proofed it and updated it. But when we started working with them in 2014, they couldn't get anybody to live there. It was just like Masdar. It was a science park, had a lot of cool microgrid, had a lot of cool robots. No one wanted to live there. Why? Because it didn't cause the right behavior patterns. It didn't induce behavior patterns. So one of the things we've learned is that, the good news is, thinking about the global impact of things, the root cause is pretty well known. It's people. It's our behavior. And the good news about our behavior is it really spins back dramatically, so we could actually work on it. You can see that 100 megacities with 10 cities per cluster, with 100 neighborhoods per city and 10,000 households per neighborhood. We could break this down into neighborhoods, and we know how to get involved with positive neighborhood models. So one of the things we've worked on is what is a complete neighborhood. And really, it's kind of like we would know in technology. It's in my backyard. You got to eat your own dog food, and you got to learn how to behave with those closest to you. And so, in terms of examples, I think there's some global examples we can talk about, but the thing I'm really interested in is, and I like your topics of this, it's really quality of life. And it starts in my backyard. And quality of life has a lot to do with food and health. And we've found that our best models for smart cities come over breakfast. We meet weekly, and there's a formalization of this called a World Cafe session that Palo Alto does. We do this in Portland, and we just use an old building. But these 4 blocks here, the park blocks, Barcelona's got a block-based model for how to do a better city. We've been piloting this in China. You can see it in the Nordic countries as well. So this is one way to start in your own backyard and really make a difference. And if you believe it's about behavior, it's sort of like tennis shoes. Michael Jordan shoes don't start with, a huge city. They start with a basketball team that's really good. One of the things I think is really interesting, if you're starting in your own backyard and you're thinking about behavior, one of the things that really dominated my behavior and my family's behavior is this phone that's 10 years old, the whole smartphone thing. And one of the things that's happening in my neighborhood is there's a lot of depression. So the Surgeon General talks about a loneliness epidemic. My wife's a psychiatrist. She's worried about the opiate epidemic. There's a diabetes epidemic. There's lots of chronic diseases that are epidemics. And you can see that this quality of life is strongly influenced by the phone. In many ways, it can be really great to have access to all this stuff. And you can see for all the different apps, small amounts of use make people happier. But conversely, if you become addicted, and more people are, it drives you off the edge. It drives the bad behavior models. So it's going to be very interesting to see how science affects quality of life. I love the persistence of the topic. And I love the scale that we can do, have a big impact on a big city, but it could start in our backyard. So thank you very much. We're very active, not only in Portland, but we host the Global City Team Challenge. It's kind of the GitHub of smart cities, and there are about 100 cities in the world that are contributing to the open commons to learn how to use these behaviors better. Glad to be here. Cheers.
Thank you, Stan. Next, I want to introduce Greta Knappenberger. She is the Smart Cities leader at Verizon. She drives the strategy, alliances, solution, and technology advocacy, as well as go-to-market efforts for Verizon's smart city offerings. She has worked in smart cities for over a decade, joining Verizon as Smart Cities Director, and has managed large initiatives spanning both the public and private sectors. She's currently also a member of CTAB, the City of Seattle Community Technology Advisory Board, and is active in this community, working to understand how to bring technology into our community in a responsible and effective way. She brings with her over 16 years of experience in IT, having consulted for many Fortune 500 organizations, including Microsoft, AT&T, and T-Mobile. So please welcome Greta.
Great, thank you. Get this loaded. So while I get my presentation loaded, I just want to thank everyone for attending. I see a few familiar faces from our Smart City Meetup group and some from other activities that we have, so good to see everyone. How many people here are actually native Seattleites, born and raised? Okay, I see maybe half a dozen people. So as of about the last census, about 2013, there were about 44% of the people living in King County and Snohomish County were actually native Seattleites, like born and bred, raised here. In the city proper, it was only about 36%. So it's pretty interesting to see. And if you're like me, I moved here almost exactly 20 years ago. I grew up on the East Coast. I moved to the Rockies and then out to the Bay Area, and ended up here in Seattle. And probably like most of you who are transplants, there was one thing that really drew you here. And for me, it was really the quality of life. There was a lot that really attracted me to the area regarding economic development, in terms of job opportunities, affordable housing, and even traffic that was not as bad as Bay Area or New York. So what I'm going to quickly go through is basically talk about what we're doing at Verizon in terms of building smart communities and really looking at it from cities down to the citizenship, some of the technology. So as I was talking about, when I moved here 20 years ago, Seattle was a little bit different. And probably many of you who've lived here for a while know that population increase, traffic is getting worse, there's a homelessness issue, there's a lot of issues around digital equity. But it's not just here. A lot of cities around the world are changing in really fundamental ways. The population is expanding, all the demographics are shifting, and a lot of the citizen needs and expectations are growing. So as you have more and more people moving into these cities, the expectations change. And a lot of the people and businesses are demanding things in new ways, in more effective ways. And we've talked to a lot of city leaders. Stan had mentioned the Global City Team Challenge, and so I'm involved in the supercluster for transportation. So we're working with cities around the globe, looking at what are some of the biggest challenges. And we're hearing a lot of things around both the country and globally. Everything from traffic congestion in cities of Boston to installing sensors in Kansas City and Washington, D.C. and more. There's really three common initiatives that many cities are undertaking that we're hearing across the board. So improving sustainability and efficiency, that is really about using your resources more effectively and minimizing a lot of the impact as growth accelerates. So we're hearing that from across the board of how they can use their resources better. Public safety is a huge issue, as well as security in almost every city that we've been working with. Making cities safer and really protecting some of the critical assets from threats are some of the things that are top of mind for pretty much globally from the ones we're working with. And then finally, where Verizon has been focused on having kind of a citizen-first approach is really making cities more livable while enabling people to participate fully. So having that same experience that when I lived here 20 years ago or now, what are some of the ways that we can enhance the way that, whether it's the infrastructure or the environment and the community, can be leveraged to make it a really better place to live. So I'm going to talk about each one of these real briefly individually. So let's start with citizen experience, because there's a lot that goes into providing a great experience, and what that means for one person might be different for another person. So things like how do you break down that digital divide and provide really reliable, fast public Wi-Fi for everyone, as well as easy access to places for internet and to learn about things going on in the city. So many of you may have not realized, there's a Sounders game going on. It's going to really impact traffic, parking, and congestion getting in. Having solutions that will help do that and making sure that everyone can get around easily and accessibly is one of the kind of key areas that we're focusing on. How do you make it easier to access public transportation and keep traffic moving smoothly so we can reduce traffic, also reduce some of the pollution from all of the emissions, and then also get people to where they need to go? And then, of course, how do we ensure safety and security? It's really a top priority no matter what city we're in, but the whole enhancing citizen experiences is really important. And we'll probably talk about it in the panel, but as part of City of Seattle's Technology Advisory Board, this is really critical of one of the top tenets of digital equity inclusion and making sure that everyone has access, and also providing the education and resources needed. So they use it for ways in which it will help their health, as well as education, so they don't become one of those unhappy people that are just on their phone, but they're using it for positive purposes as well. The second tenet is really on reducing crime and increasing security. Just take a walk around some of the city blocks. Some of you may not feel safe, when it gets dark. Other areas you've seen an uptick in crime, but really ensuring the safety and security of citizens is one of the top elements that many cities are looking for. So, how do you ensure that public spaces are well lit and that they're safe, walkable, bikeable, pedestrian friendly? So you can have those areas like Sienna talked about where they're, pedestrian and bike friendly areas. And then how do you reduce some of the illegal activity like graffiti or dumping or theft and trespassing, and use insights about some of those unsafe incidents so first responders can react better. So protecting people and places isn't really enough for many city leaders. Many are also concerned about protecting the environment as well. So improving sustainability and efficiency, they're really complex challenges that can be addressed in different ways. But we've been looking at ways to figure out how do we replace things like inefficient lighting to reduce energy consumption and cut costs. How do you really incentivize things like public transportation so that you have the aim of further cutting some of the emissions that are coming out from all the vehicles, especially the single occupancy vehicles? And then how do you convey some of those incentives to the citizens to conserve energy? So what are some of the policies that can be put in place to help incentivize people to maybe take the bus downtown instead of driving and being one of those people that circle the block like I did for a while trying to find a spot? So, looking at how do you meet traffic congestion challenges and cut some of the energy use on emissions is one of the really key areas. And again, these are all kind of global things that we're hearing across the board, and some of the solutions, and I'll go through this quickly just because most people don't realize that Verizon offers more than just the mobile phone and connectivity. We really have a comprehensive set of solutions. So, all of the challenges I just spoke about really overlap and are constantly moving targets, and depending on where you are and going. So whether you're in Seattle or Portland or in the East Coast or in China, all of these different things mean different things to them. So when it comes to the smart city, each community may have their own needs that they're looking for, and the right infrastructure that they have in place will be able to help them meet it head on, and then help create that community that is safer, more livable, sustainable, and resilient, and a place that you want to continue to live in. So, we've got kind of this holistic approach. So based on, we have the largest 4G LTE network. So with all the different connectivity and nodes, we build on top of that with a lot of the different solutions that we have. So everything from supporting developers, and then all the telematics, consumer and advertising. The Smart Communities Group is really a variety of solutions that we enable to help connect all of our citizens to come up with some different areas. I'm going to show just a couple quick success stories to give you some real tangible examples, and then I have a short video to show as well. So again, every city's going to be very unique in terms of its needs and challenges. We thought I'd share a couple of these success stories. So Kansas City was a project that we worked on starting, I believe, in 2015-16, and it was really a partnership with multiple different companies. There was about 5 different companies, including Cisco, Exact, and others. But they basically had really ambitious plans to redevelop their whole downtown and revitalize their economy using smart city technologies. So what they wanted to do was they have a 2.2-mile length of right in their downtown, and they wanted to put in a newly built light rail that connects the downtown business to all of the entertainment districts and throughout there. So they deployed some of our video nodes and lighting controls as part of a whole intelligent parking and lighting solution. And what they were looking to do is reduce energy costs, ensure that there was a lot of operational integrity for its light rail system, So it connects all people through the different parts of town. And then also one part that was really interesting was they wanted to detect poorly parked vehicles. So as the light rail was going down, they were able to use computer vision and AI to detect when someone was maybe parked on the rail a little and to prevent accidents and also delays in people getting to where they're going. And then they also wanted to gather a lot of data on pedestrians as well as vehicle traffic to inform some of the planning and economic development. So they like to say they're the smartest smart city in America. They're expanding this now. So this started a couple years ago, and they're planning to expand this whole thing out to the city and also expand it to other partners in the ecosystem. Washington, D.C. is another place that we deployed it, our core nodes, which basically provides lighting controls and, for public spaces for safety monitoring. So they're basically to look over some of these public spaces, and then they integrate with some of the surveillance systems to provide insights to really, it's not for surveillance purposes per se, but it's really for emergency preparedness and help with police situational awareness, as well as enhance the operational efficiency. So, if anyone's been here on a packed day or when there's special events going on, there's usually a big police presence, and having some of these other eyes and ears out there to help collect some of that data has been really valuable to them. Boston, this was a really interesting project because what they're focused on was on Vision Zero, where it's really if everyone is familiar with that concept, it's to reduce the fatalities of bike and safety accidents down to zero by a certain year. So they wanted to improve their traffic safety and make it more of America's walking city and improve some of the capability. Quick quote in here from the MIT Tech Review, since they're located right in Cambridge, but so their ultimate goal was to reduce traffic fatalities citywide by 2030, and the data that was used to see which traffic incidents are of most concern in specific parts of the intersection on a day-to-day basis. So it's been really interesting to see different ways in which we can use data and sensors and different platforms to help build out some of these solutions. And then finally, some of you may have heard about Sacramento, and I'm going to show a short video real quickly that'll probably explain it better than I can. But this one was really a public, I can say it 3 times fast, public-private partnership that was established last year. And what we were looking to do is to deliver a lot more safer, mobile, and sustainable city solutions with some of the infrastructure investments that we're making, as well as some of the permitting processes for installing the technology. So we're basically they're having this innovation area where we can trial a lot of the different solutions along with some of our partners to help with that. So I'm going to skip over and just show you a quick video and give you a good idea of the Sacramento project.
Infrastructure aging, traffic congestion, public safety, energy use, unequal access to technology. Every municipality wants to improve the lives of their citizens, but challenges like these often stand in the way of a happier, safer, more engaged community.
We're proud of the fact that we're the capital city and the center of public service, but we need to be so much more. We need to build a high-wage, modern economy. Tech is at the center of that.
We sort of set out our objectives, not only to build infrastructure, to connect our communities, but to deliver smart city solutions that could solve some of our most pressing challenges.
This is where Verizon comes in with our smart community solutions. For us, it's about using our assets to help people, from fiber network to advanced wireless to telematics to the cloud to data analytics and algorithms.
What we're showing here in Palo Alto is some of our smart lighting technology. We've put a number of sensors, including motion sensors and a video sensor that is detecting activity here on the street. It's not just about the raw video, but rather running analytics to detect a vehicle or pedestrians as they come through that intersection.
Here in Boston, we're running one fiber. As our customers grow, 5G and all the other wireless services, we'll be able to build off the backbone we're doing now.
What we're building here is something that's going to be extremely important, not just for tomorrow, but for the next generation of young people in our city. This truly is game-changing for us in the city of Boston.
We have this powerful kiosk that allows for two-way communication between citizens and their local community and the city. It really brings together the best of Verizon all in a single solution.
We live in a more and more connected society, and the more that the citizens can actually engage with policymakers, whether it be with tech companies, whether it be with job creation, this kind of partnership allows those opportunities to flourish.
That's why integral public-private partnerships like the one we are announcing with Verizon today will help bring technology and bring people together to enable the kind of growth that makes for a better community.
All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time being here and look forward to our panel discussion here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Greta. Okay, so last but not least, I want to introduce Rob Monster. Rob is the CEO of Digital Town. Digital Town is a global smart city platform that is bringing blockchain to cities and enabling communities to thrive locally while operating globally. He's also the CEO of global domain registrar Epic.com and managing partner of Monster Venture Partners. He is a busy guy. He was previously founder and CEO of Global Market Institute, the inventor of multi-country online market research, and previously led teams at Procter & Gamble with roles in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. So please welcome Rob. Thank you.
Hi there. So I've been running a company called Digital Town for the last 3 years. Digital Town is a public company, and that company gave me some very interesting insights into the topic of the fourth industrial revolution and how it relates to cities, what we can do as communities, as stakeholders in communities, to position ourselves to thrive in this fourth industrial revolution that is now in progress. Now, the definition of a fourth industrial revolution is maybe open to some debate, but what's generally agreed is this notion of making the present leap from computing-based to intelligence-based economies. And when you look at the actual building blocks of the underlying technologies, they're being assembled in a way that is essentially automating various aspects of intelligence. Now, the cartoon that you see there, maybe you've come across it, it depicts kind of a potential worst-case scenario of the fourth industrial revolution, the idea of a human worker being dispatched by the robot that he put in place in the first place. Now, the underlying technologies that I'm most interested in are essentially 5G, and I know that Greta speaks a lot about 5G, about AI, about robotics, about blockchain. These are all enabling technologies that are creating a sort of palette with which creators are going to be able to assemble very novel user experiences like we've never seen before, and at the pace that I think we've never seen before. And the result is something that I want to discuss. Now, Stan and I didn't coordinate about A Tale of Two Cities, to hat tip to Dickens, but I do want to draw a little parallel of A Tale of Two Cities. One of dystopia and then one of utopia. Because if you look at the historical pattern of how technology pervades communities, the historical pattern is one where technology overwhelmingly advantages some portion of the population to the expense of the long tail. And my fear is that the fourth industrial revolution will be even more vulnerable to mass inequity than what we have seen in the computing revolution, where we see, of course, tremendous prosperity here in Seattle, but you probably noticed a few homeless people as you were coming into the building, and that situation isn't getting any better. So I submit to you that there are essentially two polar opposite scenarios unfolding with regards to how the fourth industrial revolution is going to impact communities of all sizes all around the world. On the one hand, this pattern of dystopia as a direct result of hyper inequality to the point where you would characterize it as plutocracy, hyper concentration of wealth, hyper concentration of income. Now, policymakers are then turning around and advancing an agenda, you might have come across it, called universal basic income, as a sort of panacea to address the issue of what to do about the have-nots. And at the same time, as I think Greta spoke to a certain extent, and also Stan, this notion of megacities, smart megacities, with the end result of essentially creating a sort of surveillance community built around technocracy, using technology that is really ideally suited for very large cities where people can be herded into densely packed spaces, micro apartments of 50, 60, 70 square foot, and essentially you could debate about the quality of life for the majority of people who will live in that state. Now, I'll contrast that with what I would characterize as kind of a utopia, the idea that says the cost of technology is so rapidly plummeting, there's not really a compelling argument for manifesting policies of scarcity. That in fact, the technology in the form of, say, AI algorithms or free connectivity or the ability to use cost-effective processes for production, a lot of these technologies are now available to the masses, 3D printing being one of the more recent examples. And so I would contrast the dystopic scenario with one that I would characterize as being more of utopia, one where we have universal abundance and prosperity as opposed to very large disparities of haves and have-nots, a technology that is broadly available for good, that we can spend more of our productive capacity trying to advance the quality of life of everybody in the community, as opposed to I got mine, sucks for you, right? Which is the current kind of capitalist, what I would call predatory capitalist model that we operate under today. Now, I distinguish that from capitalism, which isn't inherently bad, but predatory capitalism, unfortunately, is. And with the net result, that people can bloom where they're planted. Instead of being herded into megacities, you could have secondary and tertiary cities of even 1,000 people being capable of self-supplying to a large extent, using technology, but also using the productive capacity of the communities where they are. And we're not therefore competing for this very expensive real estate. We're able to use the abundant land that we have available to our disposal. And then instead of having a surveillance society, let's have technology that empowers people to do good, and it pays to be local and it pays to be good. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go forward. Now, the dystopia scenario may sound a little bit far-fetched, but I can assure you that it's a little bit closer than you might realize. How many of you have heard of the China social credit system? Okay, meaningful number of folks here. Now, that's supposed to be fully mandatory and deployed to about 1.4 billion people by 2020. It's been in operation since 2014, and it is rapidly gaining momentum to the point that it is not only functional, but will be obligatory. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what the system does, you can look it up, but the synopsis of the plot is the ability to take a variety of inputs that define your actions in a community and applying those inputs to give you a score as high as 900. Now, this score will determine, based on a black box algorithm that will not be generally transparent to the public, what you get to do. Do you get to travel? Do you get a job? Are you allowed to use the bike share? Can you connect to the internet, right? Does that sound at all dystopic to you? It does to me. Now, not everything that's coming out of China is bad, all right? Just to be clear. There's some phenomenal innovations coming out of China, including in the theater of mobile app development. How many of you are familiar with the super app? Okay, no, just a couple. All right, of course, I think we have a Chinese now. Yes? Okay. So you have WeChat on your phone? You do, right? How many people have WeChat on their phones? Okay, a few. All right, so the super app model is actually kind of an interesting object lesson. So what the Chinese have done is they've created essentially a couple of examples, and there are a few, but two dominant ones, the notion of a super app. And WeChat is the most successful one. Parent company Tencent has about a $500 billion market cap. And then Alipay, a product of Alibaba. And so what's in WeChat? Basically, the idea is instead of you using 20 or 30 different apps to get through your day, you can download one app and it does everything. So it has all of your personal preferences, all your payment methods, it knows your location, and it has all your payment history. It's all kind of conveniently arranged to revolve around your day, right? So there's something very useful about this because you're not maintaining in 10 different apps, 10 different personal profiles that have to be updated from time to time, add a payment method and so forth and so on. So the reason why I bring this up is because of this project that I've been working on with Digital Town for the last 3 years. So with Digital Town, what we said was, well, what if we could take some of the insights that have been learned from the idea of super apps and overlay that in such a way that any community of any size, there are about 3.7 million cities, towns, and villages in the world, right? There are a lot, and many of these communities have still significant history associated with them to the point that they have branded identity. Now, give each one of those communities the ability to have essentially a branded super app where the technology that would allow any city, town, or village to essentially be its own Google, Amazon, Expedia, OpenTable, Airbnb, PayPal, and Coinbase, all in one, branded in the identity of the city, and then running locally for the benefit of the local stakeholders. Now, the local municipality can license the platform, or as security regulations evolve, the citizens can actually own it through blockchain. We actually built a platform called City Shares that tokenizes the asset and allows the citizens to own it outright. And once the Securities and Exchange Commission allows us to actually tokenize the asset and sell it to the general public, that ability to actually have shared ownership of a platform where the city becomes not only its own transactional platform, but its own bank, the ability to redeploy funds that are accrued, actually becomes possible to make locally owned and locally governed. So basically, each community has the ability to have its own locally branded super app. Every citizen gets a free smart wallet. Every merchant gets a free storefront. And the whole premise is, when we talk about citizen engagement, Greta was talking about that earlier, how do you create citizen engagement when people are not paying attention to you, right? How many of you have been to the municipal website of Seattle or the town you live in the last 1 year? Oh, more than I expected. Almost nobody goes. Normally the answer is maybe 10%. But okay, you guys are really civically engaged. I'm so impressed. How many of you have downloaded the app of your city? Okay, a couple. All right. So here's the challenge, right? You want civic engagement, but you don't actually have the ability to engage with the community because you're not having people visit your site and people are not downloading your app, right? So it becomes progressively harder to actually have civic engagement. And then the last point, dealing with the actual phenomena of transacting locally in both conventional currency and in cryptocurrency. So people can actually go and pay for a pizza with a Bitcoin. That merchant doesn't have to receive Bitcoin. They receive, say, dollars or euros, whatever their chosen currency is. But the consumer that is making that purchase is able to make that purchase with their preferred payment method. So the idea that you can essentially blend the conventional economy and the sharing economy, you can blend new economy and used economy and conventional currency and cryptocurrency all in one user experience. So basically, what do we result with at the end? Essentially creating a user experience that is locally focused, but also globally interoperable. Some people use the term global, but the point being that we actually create a framework that makes it practical and not exactly a nuisance to buy local and buy direct from the various merchants that are available in your area. These various folks that are arrayed outside of this beautiful space that are probably spending the evening under the stars, not maybe by their own choice, I'm not sure, but I'm going to guess at least one or two of them have productive capacity. What is the capacity of that individual to advertise their productive capacity, right? It's very hard, right? But if you gave them the ability to say, yeah, I'm a handyman, or I do plumbing, and I'm whatever, they have the ability to accrue reputation as a member of the community for the purposes of being able to advertise their productive capacity so that people can safely transact with that merchant, that individual merchant in this example, without handing over a credit card. You see a little example of how powerful it becomes to unleash the productive capacity of this type of a solution. And at the same time, creating a user experience that is designed to be life-enhancing so that you actually can use it as a digital field guide that is superior to the commercial alternatives, right? The Yelps and the TripAdvisors that are fairly generic, that are quite reliable when you're traveling internationally, for example, as a go-to app. But if you're a local, I mean, the locals know what's up, right? I mean, the locals actually know a lot more about what the community has to offer than what a generic Yelp or TripAdvisor with people working remotely in India and whatnot might be capable of producing. And so when the locals are co-creating that content, it actually becomes possible to create a superior, life-enhancing and habit-forming user experience. So, so that's it. I wanted to just share with you some context. You can download the app called Digital Town, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. So many interesting, I think, places to start. Great presentation, so thank you all. It occurred to me as I was listening to you that there are a lot of definitions of what a smart city is, and I thought we might start just by talking about what that means to you. So maybe we could just kind of go down the line, and maybe starting with Rob and working this way, like what is it, and how would I know? How would I know that I'm in one, for example, as a citizen?
Yeah. So let me start with what it's not. So it's not about abundant, expensive hardware that has to be acquired at great cost and has to be maintained at great cost. The initial commercialization of smart city as a theme was very much propagated by companies that specialize in selling a lot of hardware, which made it a natural fit for building mega cities, right? So I'm going to actually go ahead and be provocative right up front.
Stan, right?
No, everybody. So I want to cure you of the delusion that smart cities is necessarily the providence of only mega cities. The point is that with ubiquitous smartphones that you can get from Verizon, you are able to now use the abundant processing power of your smartphone to be able to participate in what I'll now define as the smart city as being a community of stakeholders who are co-creating quality of life.
Well said, thank you. So, smart cities actually doesn't have a universally accepted definition because, as we've heard through our various discussions, every city, community, and town is very different and have different needs in terms of what will work for them or not. But at a baseline, it's really about using information and communication technologies to help improve the quality of life, help with sustainability and livability, and help with that digital equity and the divide. So people, they have the choice to have the connectivity, and whether it's using an app like Digital Town or being able to access the data that maybe an open platform would be able to provide, so they can leverage that across. But at the end of the day, it really isn't about the technology. It's not about the platforms and the solutions and the services. It really has to be about the community and the citizens, because as Stan had pointed out, you can build the shiniest city with all the coolest tech and all the gadgets and everything. But if you don't have a city that's inclusive and fun and active and really built up by the city or by the residents that live there and listening to their needs, it really doesn't matter. So the concept of smart city, it's not a thing. It's more of this ever-evolving kind of concept that will, I think, be ever-changing. And I think Ben had mentioned buzzwords of blockchain. Smart city has become kind of a buzzword too, but again, it's really more of a concept that I think will be evolving and hopefully using the networks and solutions that are out there today.
Well, I love the comments so far. I think language is something that evolves, and city as a word with meaning is well understood. It's a traditional pattern. It's what people do. Whether you're the Indian tribe that settled Ridgefield, the largest city in North America for a while, or you're the builder of New York City or some mega city. City is a pattern of trade and economic development, and I think it's at the heart of balancing our trade and economic development. So that word, I think, is well understood, and it's a very traditional pattern we shouldn't forget, we should treasure. Smart is tricky, and smart has a lot of different meanings. I love the meeting, actually MIT thinking of intelligence as a collective property, collective intelligence allowing for better decision making. And that's actually numerically understandable, and you can prove some properties about better decision making with collective intelligence. I also like the definition of a city that enables better choices, because I think the idea of being told what to do and not having a cultural distinctive life is very important. And then I think here in the Northwest, we not only have smart city, city patterns, but we have city in the balance of nature. So when people come to Portland or Seattle, they want to live here. And it's not just because of 5G. It's because of Mount Hood,
That's
Mount
coming
Rainier,
someday.
it's because of the coast, it's our great oysters, it's, mushrooms, all kinds of laws that allow us to have better choices. And besides IBM Smart Cities, I've been very active, and we were sponsored in a documentary about quality of life by HBO. And Portland and Oregon and Seattle and Washington and now California and now Canada and now Hawaii are enabled to have better choices for quality of life. So that's not a technology choice, but I think it is a very important part of SMART, having better choices.
Do you think that smartness is just born of the current cultural moment, and that, say, a city in the future will be by default smart in the same way that it, by default has electricity today, and we don't think about it as such?
Well, so that's a good question, and I think I intended to bring the back to school issue of Scientific American. So that's always been one of the things I read along the Wall Street Journal and New York Times to sort of see the state of science. And this month's issue was the back to school issue on humans and what is our intelligence and what is smart. And it was about language and our ability to communicate meaning and develop language patterns that have a cultural heritage. And so it was the evolution of communication and the ability to incubate patterns of communication across generations that makes us a very dominant predator, but it also makes the idea of smart not just a personal idea, but a society idea. And it's measured in language, it's measured in communication, like Shannon would be proud, and it's also measured in inheritance, sort of natural selection of cultural artifacts that have quality of life benefits. So I think that issue is very valuable to read, and I think the definition of smart can be a biological natural selection language development pattern.
I think to add to that, I think when we think about a smart city, a lot of people ask, well, what's the opposite of that? Is it a dumb city? Or, but I would like to say it's a traditional city, and it's one in which that it has, maybe aging infrastructure. It has roads with a lot of potholes and old bridges and tunnels. It doesn't have connectivity, it's spotty everywhere. The education and public safety and healthcare systems aren't great. So to answer your question, will the city of the future all be smart? I'm hoping that, connectivity and network aside, because we are laying fiber across the whole country, and 5G will be coming soon. Having the ability for your communities to be able to upgrade it, so you don't have this old aging infrastructure, and you're not living in a place that is run down as more and more people are starting to move in, and you can't have the support. So I like to think of the concept of smart, of just the city smarter in terms of enhancing and improving it, so the quality of life continues to be good and allows the equal access for everyone.
Yeah, to build on that, you look back at the history of consumer technology, 50 years ago, consumer appliances kind of up and coming, and now, of course, we all have them. And the whole history of flat televisions or computers and whatever, smartphones that have more processing power than the mainframes that I had the privilege of playing with as a youth, as they were just coming out. And I think the same principle applies to smart city technology. And to draw an example, when the cost of figuring out, are you at risk? The people who were caught in terrible forest fires this summer, or the people who are suffering through floods right now in Carolina and Virginia, the technology for detecting based on weather patterns, based on where you are in terms of physical proximity, for which there's a known proximity to sea level and proximity to the storm, the technology for being able to give you an individual assessment of your imminent personal risk in real time, like for example, there's a firestorm that is happening 2 blocks away and the phone wakes up and gets you the heck out of Dodge, along with all your pets, right, and whatever else that is of personal value to you. That technology is mature and it's not expensive. And so it becomes a question of to what extent that technology is simply deployed into a deliverable user experience that people can license, right? And so technology that can be free should be free. Just think about that, right? The idea that says the technology that algorithmically can derive your personal risk in a circumstance or your personal proximity to a parking space, there's really no reason for that to be an expensive piece of software. That individual feature is not necessarily a high cost of goods. And so I think, to answer your question, the pervasiveness of smart is going to come down to the commoditization of the underlying technology that applies model best practices that were incubated in some academic learning laboratory project, like is happening in Kansas City, or that is NAST backed and so forth, and saying, okay, let's get that out of the lab and let's make it ubiquitous. And that's the beauty of the downloadable mobile apps, is you can take something that works, overlaid with something that is freely available, like GPS, and freely available like topographical maps, and freely available like weather, and freely available like a threat of earthquake or threat of fire, and now make ubiquitous something that maybe saves a lot of lives or improves quality of life. Saving your life is probably the foundation. Price of
That's
entry.
good quality of life metric,
It's like not
being
be
alive.
dead.
Yeah. Well, maybe then in terms of quality of life, we could talk about that for a second. I was struck in listening to your presentations just how ordinary many of the smart city experiences were. So in my business of design, a lot of what we do is create fairly romantic, elaborate stories about the future, many of which are by design magical. And in the world that we saw tonight, I saw ordering pizza, just kind of getting from point A to point B, having access to infrastructure, things like that. And I'm wondering, like, is that a choice that you made, and is that related to quality of life? Like, do you think the quality of life is really kind of simple? Because stand cities, for instance, seem quite stable patterns, to use your phrase.
Well, so yeah, I think the smarter question leads into that one. If you just consider medicine, the total knowledge of medicine is growing, exponentially, and we know more and more about the genome, and more genomes, and we've got this idea of precision medicine to actually prescribe stuff by the genome. But yet, we live longer and we die of worse stuff. We die of chronic disease, we die of Alzheimer's and cancer and stuff that lasts for 10, 20 years of really not great quality of life. So I think the question of smarter isn't just more total knowledge cheaper, more total data cheaper, ubiquitous. That's actually the paradox of choice. It makes you sadder to have too many choices. So I think the thing in medicine, more and more doctors are realizing we need to have preventative medicine. It's not just a drug for every symptom, or we'll have opiate epidemics. I mean, the pleasure drugs will just go crazy. We have more vocabulary than ever before, and we have a loneliness epidemic. We have more, everybody can talk to Siri and translate Chinese and Greek and find the root of every new word and stuff. So I think that there's a simple balance that's missing, and I think it's something like pets, and it's something like love, and it's something like food that is really missing in precision medicine. Missing in precision medicine. So I think that more and more doctors are looking at more holistic practices. And I think more and more quality of life choices have to do with understanding caregiving to more family members. If you look at housing, a third of the population is single occupants, and it's growing. And you look at the number of people that actually have, you know, the Dunbar number of 150 real friends, but it starts with 5 really close friends that are life and death friends, and 15 really intimate expert friends, and 50 business associates. People don't have the 5. Forget about, you know, 1,000 likes a day in Facebook. There's only 150 people that really matter in your brain about how you feel. And you've got to have the core of those there. So I think at the heart of this simple story is the recognition that sharing a breakfast and going from 5 to 15, like we're doing around the J&M restaurant in Portland, that leads to discussions that scale to megacities. And they scale because we're using traditional city patterns. They're not, they're not these terrible things. We've had 1 million people in a city for 1,000 years. We know how to do that. We've had 10 million people in a city for 100 years before cars. It's not, not that hard. We know how to do this. We know how to behave. We've lost the kernel. We've lost the 5. So I think we need to go back to understanding our dogs. We need to go back to understanding our families and our friends, and and not skip over, too fast.
To kind of add to that, I like how you kind of talk about like Maslow's level of hierarchy of needs, which from a personal level, there are basic needs that people need to have met in order to feel like their quality of life is at a point that they're happy. And the way I've been thinking about it is that working with city leaders and across different communities, what they're hearing from people are these very simple basic needs and use cases like traffic, environmental issues and pollution and safety, like really basic things. They want to be able to get around their city, drop their kids off to school, go to work. They want to breathe clean air. They don't want to have to there's the air pollution at the worst levels ever, worse than Beijing. And they want to feel safe walking around their community with their families and everything. And so while I think it's good to have those future-looking thoughts to see what's possible, but at the same time, you have to level it down to what do people need today and right now that will satisfy their needs and make them feel like we're serving their needs. We're using their taxpayer dollars and serving our constituents in a way that will help everyone's quality of life improve. And so as a technology provider, we try to go in and not provide technology to create a problem. We try to have ones that are, addressing a specific problem that the community leaders are telling us, like, hey, our traffic is terrible. The lights aren't timed very well. We'll be sitting at a light forever and there's no cars, but I'm still sitting there. Or it just takes forever to get through and everyone's backing up. Or just, all the different issues with parking, or some of the business owners are not feeling like they're getting enough addressed. So I appreciate your question, because I think, a lot of us like to, excuse me, think big and large and, kind of that utopian vision of what's possible with all this really cool technologies out there. But when you work in smart cities and when you're starting to work with, government agencies, they bring you down to earth really quickly on what's possible, what's doable, what's scalable, what they're going to be able to support in a way that will help, with the digital equity inclusion as well as privacy and cybersecurity areas too. So.
Yeah. So, you asked the question about, the more romantic stuff that maybe is a bit more groundbreaking. And I think the answer to that question is these experiments are being run by various groups that are doing all manner of innovative things. But ultimately, it needs to have an economic model in order for it to actually be capable of being funded by something other than a profit-maximizing monolith that has the objective, of course, replicating a solution and making it a de facto standard, not for the sake of achieving ubiquity and standardization in order to maximize quality of life for the maximum number of people, but rather to create the maximum market capitalization, right? So balancing the competing needs of a profit maximizing network of businesses against the maximizing quality of life for the benefit of the collective is one of the big challenges. And I think when I look at like the image that I put next to Utopia, that image is actual artist rendering of a group that is doing a rollout of a carbon neutral community in the Netherlands that produces its own produce. It produces no waste. It is completely self-contained from the standpoint of quality of life. People can actually live in that village, and they produce no waste, and they produce their own means of sustaining themselves, right? It's kind of a profound thing. Of course, they still have international connectivity so that they can be productive using technologies that would be available to anybody else. But the point is they don't have to necessarily truck in from 1,000 miles away produce, because the produce is being produced in their own greenhouses that are energized with their own solar, and that are able to essentially process their own waste, including baby diapers and all of that. And I think at the end of the day, for those types of technologies to become broadly available, the economic model will matter. And so what you see with Digital Town is really the question of answering the question of what's the economic engine. So being able to essentially take the revenue that is currently going into the hands of the Amazon, Expedia, OpenTable, Airbnb, and so forth, or MasterCard or Visa or PayPal, taking that transactional activity and deriving it for the benefit of the collective, because those things are actually not expensive. If it can be free, it should be free. The cost of doing a table booking at a restaurant is basically zero, right? But in fact, it costs a restaurant quite a lot of money, right? And so these types of technologies can actually be economic engines that generate transactional revenue that turn around and fund the romantic projects that you're looking for.
Yeah, do you think that we have the right incentives in place today, just in terms of economic systems that will give rise to the kind of utopian outcomes you seek?
Well, okay, so the biggest single challenge that I've encountered in taking on this project is that every city has its own city manager, and these city managers actually build careers around doing everything differently. And it's just the nature of the beast, right? You create essentially a professional role, and their job is to basically come in for between 1 and 5 years and basically deliver some execution, but not necessarily to be rewarded for essentially harmonizing or achieving interoperability. When you go from, say, SeaTac Airport to Everett Event Center, and you have to change across 3 different bus systems because they're across 3 different counties with 3 different tariff systems, and yeah, the Orca card, plugs some of that gap, but, how powerful would it have been to find the #1 hotshot guy or gal with competency in public transport and say, you know what, I want you to solve this problem statewide or nationwide, and to find the model best practice, incubate it in some jurisdiction for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then roll it out everywhere. And oh, by the way, here's a self-funding budget based on a transaction system, right?
That won't work. We know that won't work. That's one of the paradoxes I gave. But I do think it is an answer to the question. You have to measure the right things.
You're not going to get away unanswered on that one.
Yeah. So you do have to measure the right things, and I think it's clear the answer is no. We don't measure the right things. And the World Economic Forum, has pointed that out, the Beyond GDP initiative. And the guy who invented GDP said ahead of time, this isn't the right thing. So I think we know we're not measuring the right thing, and I think we got to be careful when we're redesigning what to measure. We don't hand it to a bunch of traffic engineers who think it's measuring car efficiency, when it's really about quality of life. And, the European cities are going car-free. So, why did they think of that? Because they'd run 1 million-person cities without cars. So I think we need to experiment. What we know about science is you can't know. It's always changing, and you've got to keep doubting it. It's going to keep updating. So you can't go off with the science approach, and Gödel proved this. You can't go off with the science approach and complete the problem. Science is embedded in behaviors, And behaviors can spin the science bad, and behaviors can spin the science good. And so you have to come up with this natural selection process that gives a positive behavior spin to what you're doing. And we know from GitHub, we know from open source, you'd rather fail in a small thing than a big thing. So start this thing small, do this natural selection around a behavior test bed, and then scale it. And frankly, we need to scale this so that there's a planet that supports 10 billion people and doesn't kill all the other species on the world. So we could go off and design some experiments about, living in small communities that, applies, how many people you can support. So I think we have to have this evolutionary process, and I think the metrics are part of the problem. So there's a big, so in my slides I talked about the economy of cities. To evolve a new set of metrics, I think we want diversity of metrics, just like diversity of species. And we want to do some sort of a smarter breeding of better choices and do smaller things. So community by community inside a city. In Portland, we have 100 neighborhoods. Portland's about 1 million. So there ought to be like 10 Portlands around some mega city that's clustering this stuff together as a port that has a match around it. So I think we don't measure the right things and we're not running the right experiments. And the experiments are really important to balance. And so that was why the slides came off that way.
Greta, I'm wondering if you have some thoughts just about, in your work with cities, kind of real cities, if you could change something about, say, what they're doing, maybe another way of asking it would be, well, what are the mistakes that they make, or the thing that they could stop doing that would allow them to, foster a more innovative environment or make faster progress or the like?
That's a great question. I think while there's probably a lot of cities making mistakes, I think failing has helped them see where their gaps are and where they need to be kind of more innovative and adapting to this new paradigm. A lot of really progressive cities, Kansas City, Portland, down in California, there's numerous cities that are establishing innovation zones where they're really welcoming the community to come in and test and validate and, fail and fail fast on their technology solutions so they can test and validate and say, hey, will this really work with our solutions? Yeah, this was great in Portland. Is it going to really work in our community? So I think, where it would be great, where there's some hurdles around the kind of policy and regulations around getting those things set up in a way that they can have them funded. Because a lot of cities have a challenge where they can't show favoritism. They can't be like, oh, okay, you've got all of these great solutions, and I know you, Stan, so come on in. Or, Rob, I've heard you talk. That sounds really great. That would work great for our community. There's a process, a very, very long procurement process to usually get a technology deployed in a city. Some cities have figured out ways in which to accelerate that. Some have city managers that are more forward-thinking and are looking to, they see that kind of innovation to help drive economic development, help create new jobs, and spur innovation in their areas. And that's probably been one of the biggest challenges, is just there's a lot of obstacles to get some of these technologies which they find value in implemented in a way that's, it won't be outdated before it's done. So I think, to summarize, policy and procurement processes are probably the biggest headaches and challenges. I wouldn't say they're failures. It's the way they've been done for decades. And with the digital transformation and all the ubiquity of connectivity and devices, cities just can't keep up with the pace of change. And so I think, forums like this are great to help with just general education to the community, as well as policy leaders and city leaders, just so they're aware of what's possible. So.
I think one thing that is going to help a lot is you will see in the very near future, I think, some adoption of self-sovereign identity or some other global framework for digital identity that will be GDPR compliant and allow you to have control over who knows what about you and for how long. And the reason why that's interesting is because, the ability to essentially authenticate. Right now we think about it in terms of logging into online banking or something like that. But, it also relates to, for example, after-hours access to a building, right? If every one of us who was invited to this event or signed up for this event had the ability to have the QR code that allows them to access this building until 10 o'clock at night, then nobody would have had to be an attendant waiting to see who was coming in or not coming in to the building. And so the frameworks for interoperability are built around standards. When somebody develops a great solution for hiring and paying for a bike share that works with dockless and dock bikes and works with also private citizen bikes, people who, for example, want to rent out their bike to other people in a circular economy that doesn't require some municipal deployed solution, for example, those solutions that get incubated in some city in Portugal can now be made available to every other city because of a shared framework for digital identity, a shared framework for payments, right? Standards will drive interoperability, will reduce cost, and will allow an open source movement to actually unfold, which I think is probably one of the most encouraging things that I see on the horizon for smart cities.
Yeah, maybe just as a quick follow-up, what would happen, do you think, if your company, Digital Town, were wildly successful? And I was thinking about this as you were talking. I was wondering about, well, if you actually displaced, say, the behemoths, I think you called them, and towns essentially developed, I think what you're doing is you're developing kind of a hyper-local currency model of some sort. What would be the sort of like larger economic impacts of that systemically? Like, would that create other economic realities that would in turn become new sorts of problems, do you think? Or what is the role of, like are you going to take down Amazon?
Yeah, so, fundamentally, it's about restoring power to the people. It's actually a sort of revolution against the status quo of all roads leading to ever shrinking number of hands, right? Because what you see unfolding right now is kind of unsustainable, right? It's great if you were long on Amazon or long on Seattle real estate for the last 10 years, but if you weren't one of those, then maybe it's not so good, right? And so we in Seattle live a little bit in a bubble because we have tremendous prosperity, but at the same time, when you look at the grander effects of, how many of you saw the announcement, it was leaked, I guess, that Amazon is going to put out 3,000 Amazon Go stores by the year 2021, right? So you saw that news, right? So I don't think that's the public number, and who knows, the number may actually be much bigger than that. But when you have Amazon Go stores competing head-to-head with people who are running traditional mom-and-pop stores that are built around having somebody at the register that has to get paid $15 an hour, and then maybe there's going to be an undesirable outcome associated with that. So I think to a certain extent, the ability to use ubiquitous technology like smartphones that everybody can afford opens up all kinds of possibilities to allow peer-to-peer, peer-to-merchant, peer-to-government commerce that is being delivered in the most efficient way with the least infrastructure maintenance possible. All you have to do is maintain your own personal smartphone, which of course we naturally do, right? So I don't really see any great downside from unleashing that type of a movement. And I have no idea how wildly successful it will or won't be, but the template that we've built around co-creating quality of life and restoring power to the people and creating a culture of innovation that is around thriving local economies and making them globally interoperable, I think that idea deserves to exist.
So, I think it's really cool to have more and more pervasive technology choices. And I think one of the things that's enabling these traditional patterns that we called simple to happen is when we had the Industrial Revolution, Detroit was where the cars were made. You had to move to Detroit to be in the auto industry. The new technologies allow us to live with more choice, live in more places of choice, live in neighborhoods that have retail, offices, and also your family. You don't have an industrial park over here, a retail mall over there, the school over here. So the technologies have enabled us to have more choices. But I don't think, we can, and so having more choices we still have this problem that behaviors dominate. You can spin any technology positive, or you can spin it negative. One of the really nice things about Rob's technology stack is it allows smaller things instead of bigger things, so we get to learn how to behave around it. But I think we know from every social media app that everything that's a technology solution has good and bad. And when we got free stuff from Google, I mean, the internet was funded by sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And, that's why video is so available. So, I think we have to be careful of what we get for free and how we use the digital stuff that's so ubiquitous. And remember that we're just people, and it is about life. And it is about caring for each other. So it's not just about being encrypted. It's not just about having, language tools that help translate. You've got to do something that helps the quality of life. And I think, it's very cool to have all the technologies that do that. And I think what city managers are working with 100 real cities. And the thing that people are learning is you don't have to be Masdar and do it from scratch. And you don't have to be Pudong and do 10 million at a time as a suburb of Shanghai. You can do it in your own neighborhood with your own cafe, with your own quality of life metrics, and be private and try to do a safe experiment. But you've got to do stuff that matters. And so we're not using the right metrics, and we've got to experiment with, what makes a good bar? You've got to have women at the bar. So, Kashiwa Noho forgot. They built this thing with 10,000 guys, and nobody else wanted to live there. Huh, amazing. Cheers.
Okay, so I'll pivot away from the bar. And maybe just ask Greta, if you're thinking, say, 5 to 10 years out, what is your hope for a city like Seattle as it thinks about how it might integrate technology to, solve really hard and intractable problems like homelessness or traffic or any number of really complicated things?
That's a great question. I think, addressing a lot of the things that we talked about today, it'll be a slow process. So 5 or 10 years is really down the road. City of Seattle is actually, and actually the state of Washington has a plan that they're looking at for 2040. So most of these plans are going to be looking out not 5 or 10 years, because that's like in a blink of an eye is going to be here tomorrow. They're looking out further to figure out how can we, adapt to the increasing number of people moving in here, to the increasing traffic that we're going to see, some of the environmental issues or things in the climate that might be changing, and help improve the safety so they, we can still look back and say, yeah, I moved to Seattle 30 years ago, and it's still as great as I remember, and not feel like I need to get out of here. I need to move to like Boise, Idaho, or something, just so I can have a better quality of life. So. I think incorporating a lot of the elements that we've talked about today are great. From a technology perspective, there's autonomous and connected and electric and shared mobility and scooters and flying drones and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really about the community and the citizens and having a place that you want to live, that you think that this is a really great place to live, to raise children, and eventually retire someday and not feel like you want to move away. So.
Great. Rob, maybe one last question for you. I'm curious what you think either has to happen or has to not happen in order to avoid the dystopian scenario.
Oh, well, it will come down to courage. It will come down to initiative, courage, and leadership from citizens, more so than city managers, although city managers and elected officials can be courageous. I think that the framework for fomenting what is in effect a sort of revolution, that is a revolution of inclusion and a revolution of interoperability, made possible by an open source movement, right? No different than people, broadly adopting Linux back in the day, was made possible by somebody taking some initiative and then saying, hey, I could use some help here. And it became an open source movement that sustains us still to this day, and to a certain extent, put operating system publishers in check from charging too much for their product because there was an open source alternative, right? So I think it will come down to courage, and courage for crazy maniacs and entrepreneurs to go foment ideas and turn them into functional prototypes and raise capital and so forth. Speaking of Digital Town, we did 7 acquisitions in the last 2.5 years, knowing that we couldn't possibly build it all ourselves, right? So that's a certain kind of courage, and I've said to my close family, along the way of building this company, if you hear a story about how I shot myself in the head twice, that's not how it ended, right? So I think a big part of it is going to be that type of courage, courage
And perseverance,
to create,
right?
and then courage to interoperate, right? Because how powerful would it be, if you arrive in a city like Seattle, and the bike share app that you use in Pittsburgh also works in Seattle. And oh, by the way, that app also works with public transportation, works with a scooter, and will allow you to book a table at the best restaurant, and so forth and so on, right? That type of interoperability is only made possible by courage, because there's no federal agency in this country at this time. China has an advantage, right? It's basically a dictatorship, right? So, everybody is doing what they're told, right? You're going to have a social score whether you want it or not, right? So that's not how we roll here in the US, right? So it's going to come down to initiative and courage from people coming together, and like the NIST, that Stan is a big part of, bringing together these stakeholders and saying, you know what, let's not wait for some federal agency to dictate to us what the standard is going to be. Let's agree on one, and everybody can get on board. Right?
Great. I think that's a great spot to end it on. Thank you to our panelists for a great conversation and for your presentations. I hope this was enlightening and interesting. We only mentioned blockchain a handful of times, so check. Thanks so much.